Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, we're doing some French farmhouse Christmas thrift flips. For my first project, I'm going to be using this wooden board. I believe it's probably a pizza board. I envision it in a French kitchen, so I am going to give it a coat of Dixie Belle's Fluff chalk mineral paint. I've already given this a good clean, and right now I'm just trying to get all of my brush strokes nice and even, and I will also be going around the outside of this piece. I'm not going to paint the other side just in case somebody wants to use it as an actual serving board, so it will still be okay to use on that side. It won't have any paint on it or anything like that. Just a reminder that you can find a full product list in the description of this video, and you can also find most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Unfortunately, despite cleaning this piece, I noticed that once this coat of paint was dry that I had some bleed through. So I did then have to go and grab my Paint Couture's 2-in-1 primer in white. This is a stain blocker as well as a bonding primer. So I'm just going to lay this straight over the top. I'm just going to do one coat. If you've got really stubborn, really obvious stains, I suggest that you do 2 coats. But once this is down, my next coat is going to be fine. You're not going to be able to see those stains popping through. Once my second coat of the Fluff chalk mineral paint was dry, I grabbed JRV's green sack stripe stencil. I'm positioning it in the center and then holding it down, and then I'm using some of Dixie Belle's Barn Red chalk mineral paint. I've offloaded the excess, and I'm using my JRV 1-inch stencil brush to do my stenciling today. I'm holding the stencil in place and I'm not dabbing or swirling. I'm actually running that brush along the lines of the green sack stencil design. A lot of people have trouble with this stencil, but I definitely recommend that you do this as opposed to dabbing, because when you do that, that motion can cause those very thin stencil pieces to shift. So I always keep my brush down, I pull it along the stencil. I do not do dabbing. This is definitely the way that I have found success. So I'm going to continue adding that paint until I have the entire design stenciled. If you don't have access to this stencil, another option you could take is to do the lines with some masking tape instead. I went with red today for a festive feel, but obviously if this isn't your style, you could go with green or whatever color suits you. I've taken the stencil away. As you can see, I've got a pretty crisp finish, and now I'm just going to add some more of that white, and I'm just going to bring it all the way up the handle. I thought about keeping that same width of that line on the stencil, but in the end I just painted the whole handle. I felt like this still felt quite balanced doing it this way. Once my paint is completely dry, I'm taking a 220 grit sandpaper block and I'm just going to do some light distressing over the top of my green sack stripe. I want this to look vintage, I want this to look old. I'm positioning my sanding block so that it's not overlapping with the white too much, and you definitely want to make sure that you just blow the dust away or gently wipe it away. Next, I want to spell out the words Merry Christmas. I looked up the French spelling of this, and I'm going to use this stencil that I created with my Cricut. Now, I was inspired by Jamie Ray Vintage's most recent video. They've got an old world font stencil. Unfortunately, it can take up to 2 months for these things to arrive from the US. I was impatient, so I went on Etsy, found a similar font, and made my own stencil. These obviously aren't as great quality as JRV stencils, but this will do in the meantime while I wait for mine to arrive. So I'm going to be using Coffee Bean Chalk Mineral Paint by Dixie Belle, and I'm just going to go through and carefully stencil each of those letters. This time I am using a 1/2-inch JRV stencil brush. So I'm just dabbing and stippling on that paint, doing a tiny bit of swirling. I'm trying my best not to get any of that black paint on the white, but if I do get a little bit, that's okay. I do intend to do a bit of distressing anyway with this project. So I'm going to continue stenciling my letters out, and I've spaced them the best I can. Unfortunately, we do end up with a little bit more space on the left side as opposed to the right, but it doesn't matter. This is a hand-painted project, and I don't think that the sort of French breadboards and all those sorts of lovely antiques would have been perfect anyway, because they definitely would have been done by hand as well. So I'm going to continue until I have finished stenciling the word Merry out, and then once I've done that, I'm going to move on to the word Noel, which of course means Christmas. So I'm going to continue doing that as I go. To make my stencil, I did use some little A4 plastic inserts that usually go into folders with my Cricut Maker. You could use vinyl if you don't have access to that, or if you don't want to use a stencil, you could use stamps for this part instead as well. Once my paint has completely dried, I'm going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and I'm going to go around the edges of my wooden board and I'm going to do some distressing. I'm swapping between my 220 grit and my 80 grit. This paint is really on there, it's sticking really well, so sometimes I use the 80 grit to get things started and then I use the 220 grit to smooth out any scratches that may have occurred from that coarser grit sandpaper. So I'm going to work my way around the board until I am happy with all of that distressing. Next, I'm going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and I'm going to lightly distress our lettering that we stenciled on. Just make sure that you carefully brush off that dust or blow it off. Don't use a wet wipe because you could get some smearing. Once I'm finished with this, I'm going to seal it with a spray sealer to reduce any risk of smudging that red, and I'm also going to add some twine to the top for hanging. And here's our finished French Christmas board. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I think it has a real rustic elegance to it. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my next project, I'm going to use this wooden box that I thrifted for about $1. I actually quite like the paint job on the outside. It's rustic, it's primitive. I'm going to use those same little stencil letters that I created again, and this time I'm just going to spell out the word antiques. I envision this on a dining table decorated up for Christmas for a bit of a rustic touch. So I'm just laying out the letters where I want them to go. I'm going to be using Fluff chalk mineral paint for my stenciling today, and I'm going to obviously start with the letter A. Again, I did try to lay out these letters pretty evenly and center them, but it is always a little bit tricky when you are dealing with single letter stencils. I'm not too worried though about it being imperfect. If you wanted to make this project a little bit more festive, obviously you could spell out maybe Merry Christmas or Christmas trees, but I wanted to make sure that this was a piece that I could use outside the festive season as well. Once my paint was completely dry, I took some 220 grit sandpaper to do some light distressing over the top of our letters so that it blended in a bit better and still kept in with that vintage look that we're going for. Next, I want to give the inside a little bit of a refresh, so I'm using Paint Couture's Van Dyke Brown Glaze, which you can also use as a wood stain. I have misted my wood a little bit just to help that stain spread on a bit more evenly, and I'm just going to brush it over the entire inside of this piece. It's not going to change the tone super dramatically, but it is going to give it a bit of a refresh. There were some stains that I couldn't get out despite cleaning this piece, so it's also going to hide those a bit as well. To wipe off the excess stain there, I'm just using a paper towel. If you'd like to try any of the Paint Couture products that I have used in this video or any of my others, I would love it if you would use my affiliate link. I will put that link in the description and on the screen, and you've only got a couple more days to use my code Farmhouse75 to get free shipping on orders of $75 or more. Next, I wanted to add a bit more of interest to the outside. I had these little metal pieces that I took off another project that I'm working on, and I always save those interesting pieces if I can. So I'm going to lay some of this metal trim around the bottom of our box. There's some little nails also that I'm going to be using. I'm going to hammer those in, and then that will hold this trim in place. So I'm just going to work my way around the box adding this trim. I just felt like it added, well, quite an antiqued feel, like it really did give it more of an authentically aged look. So I'm going to continue adding this until I am finished around the whole box. If this was a little bit too rustic for you, obviously you could leave this step out. I also did think about possibly adding some little feet to the bottom, but I really wanted to keep a sort of antiqued look with this, like it was found at a old chateau or in an old farmhouse and just repurposed. I just wanted to take a quick moment to let you guys know that I have a Facebook creatives group that I would love for you to join. You can share photos of your projects, you can interact with other creatives. I'm there to help you out and answer questions as well. I will put the link for that group in the comments so that you can come and join us. And here's a look at the finished project. I love how this turned out. I think it would make a great Christmas centerpiece with a Christmas tree on a dining table, but it's also a great piece for year-round use. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. For my final project today, I'm going to be working on these little wooden houses that I thrifted. I'm very lucky to have found these. I haven't had to break out my saw or do any woodworking. So we're going to get straight to it. I am going to be staining these with the Van Dyke Brown Glaze by Paint Couture. I'm going to be covering the entire house. I want a really nice warm brown for these projects. We are going to be adding some paint, but you are still going to be able to see some of that wood tone. So this is just a really beautiful tone for this project. Just like before, I'm using a paper towel to wipe off that excess and blend in that stain. You can see that the edges are definitely taking the stain a little bit different. Obviously that is because they are raw edges, but I'm actually going to be leaving some of the raw edges showing. I'm not going to be painting them, so I actually don't mind this tonal variation at all. If you don't have access to this glaze, of course you can use a traditional stain for this part, or you could create a paint wash from a brown water-based paint. Once the houses were dry, I took my milk paint by Fusion in the color Hotel Robe. I'm going to measure out a capful and then I'm going to put an equal amount of water in with my mixture. I'm going to stir it really well to get all of those powders mixed in with that water, and then we're ready to go. I'm going to be applying a coat to the house, not very thick because we are going to be doing another coat. So I'm going to apply down a thinner sort of a coat, and then I'm going to use my hairdryer to speed up the drying process to get us some of that crackle and texture. But I am going to go over it again and repeat that same process, and this really is the coat where that magic happens, where we get those cracks, we get that wonderful texture that only milk paint can really give us. So after it's dry, you can see here I've got some wonderful cracks, some bumps. I'm going to be doing some sanding later to bring out even more of those details. I'm then going to add some paint just on the side, but you can see I am leaving part of the roof because I do want the roof to remain that lovely stained wood tone. And on each of those sides, I am repeating the same process as we did to the front, laying down a thin coat, drying it, laying down another coat, and drying it again. And I'm going to be repeating the same process for each of these houses, laying down that thin coat, drying it, and then doing that second coat and speeding it up again. I did have to do 2 coats here because we do have that darker stain underneath. I'm definitely going for a bit more of a neutral, primitive, simple look with these, but if you wanted to get a bit more festive, you could use a red or a green milk paint perhaps instead. If you don't have milk paint, of course, you could come in with whatever paint you like to use for this particular project. I just really like the authentically aged and rustic feel that milk paint brings. Once all of my houses are completely dry, I'm going to be using Dixie Belle's Coffee Bean, and I'm using a small artist brush, and I'm just going to freehand paint on some very simple details. For the church, I'm doing a sort of an arched shaped front door down the bottom, And then I'm also going to be coming in and adding a couple of little windows up the top. Again, I just kept it really simple. I want these to look primitive and not too overwhelming. So I'm just using my brush to draw 4 little rectangles. That's going to be our little windows there. And I'm just going to be doing 2 windows on this particular project. I'm not going to add a cross or any other details. If you're doing this, of course, you could go in and add more details. Again, I just wanted to keep it simple. For the next little house, I'm going to be doing a rectangle shaped door, and I am going to keep the windows the same, still going to keep the same formation of the 4 smaller rectangles arranged to look like a 4-paned window. If you're not confident freehand painting, I'm sure you could probably make a stencil for this, or you could use a ruler and draw lines out with a lead pencil for you to follow for this step. Again, I wanted a primitive look, so I didn't really care if they weren't very perfect here. If you're looking for more Christmas craft ideas, make sure you check out my Christmas playlist from this year and last year. I have lots of ideas for the festive season. Once my black paint was completely dry, I took some 220 grit sandpaper and I'm going to lightly distress over the top of the details that I've painted on, but it's also going to take off some of the flaking paint that we managed to achieve with that milk paint, and it's really going to give us that wonderful chippy vintage feel that we are going for. So I'm going to continue sanding each of those houses until I'm happy with the look. Once I'm finished sanding, I'm going to take some of Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in Clear and I'm going to seal the houses. You definitely want to use a wax to seal your milk paint so that you don't accidentally reactivate it. That can definitely hide all of the wonderful chippiness. It can smear it. So I definitely recommend a wax, or you could use a hemp oil for this step. And you can see I'm just using a paper towel to buff back the excess. And here are our finished mini houses. I think these turned out really sweet. They definitely would be great as a Christmas village, but I think these could be out year round as well. Let me know what you think of these in the comments. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video and that it's given you some ideas on how you can add a bit of a French farmhouse feel to your decor using stencils and milk paint. Let me know if you had a favorite project from today. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out. If you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.